Welcome back to Heaven Official's Blessing, Tianguan Sifu. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, but that's where the shorthand tgcf comes from. We are reading chapter 28 today, and before we jump into that, let me summarize what's been going on for folks. Hello, Pink Cupcakes, Lobsoul, Phil, and Jessica. Thanks for joining us. So our novel here is about a heavenly official, kind of like a god, god of bad luck. He's not very well liked. He's not had an easy run of it, but he's trying to turn things around. And he's kind of got a flirtation going on with a ghost king, a very powerful leader of the dead named Hua Cheng, who's kind of pretending to be human, but everybody knows he's not. Xie Lian is our main hero. Sun Long is the name of the love interest. The two of them are trying to solve a mystery about this kingdom that was destroyed long ago, and people keep getting destroyed, keep getting killed coming by the kingdom, and they're like, well, what's going on? Why are there ghosts over there killing people? Let's figure it out. Last time, everybody was stuck in the sinner's pit, and this little ghost girl showed up and said, I know you, Xie Lian, you were here 200 years ago when all this stuff went down, and you died. He didn't really die, because he's immortal. But it was revealed that Xie Lian once served in the army in this country and tried to stop the war and failed, and everybody kind of trampled him, and it's basically a sad backstory where there was a war between humans, he tried to interfere and was hurt for it. So he is in the middle of kind of thinking back on this time when he tried to stop the war and failed, and we're going to go from there. As for the website that I used to read the novel, it is a Google Drive that translates like the last, I think like chapter 30 to the rest of the story. The very first parts are from a group called Sakulations. I'm probably saying that wrong. There we goes. They did the first portions. Let me go over and I can post the link in the chat. And then the second part, I will have to go pull that link up. Sometimes, groups, they can't finish the story, or, somebody else takes over, something like that. That's what's happened here. The first part of the story was done by one group, and the second part by another. So this is the first portion of the story, and then the second portion is in my, bookmarks. Where did it go? I've been working on organizing my bookmarks because they're all so incredibly messy. Here is the part we're at. We are on chapter 28. And that chapter is called, let's see here. Chapter 28, Dallying Hualian, Nightfall in Sinner's Pit. And this will be the last Sinner's Pit part, so. I really don't remember, all right, Xie Lian said. Even if he couldn't die, he couldn't stand that kind of butchering. Thinking this couldn't go on in his head, Xie Lian resolutely dropped to the ground to fake his death. But even in death, he was trampled to the point of passing out. It was water choking him that woke him, because corpses were usually thrown into rivers after battles. Xie Lian went with the river's flow and floated back to the kingdom of Yong'an like a heap of junk. Afterwards, he took several years to recover from his wounds, picked up an unbroken compass to start off anew, and finally made it to his original destination in the south, and stopped minding what happened in the kingdom of Banyu. I'm sorry, Banyu muttered again. Fu Yao furrowed his brow. Why does she keep apologizing to you? Sun Long suddenly spoke up. Kei Mo said that we've been saying Grand Tutor because that's what the original translation said. The new translation says Gyoshi, so I'm going to start calling her the Gyoshi of Banyu. Kei Mo said the Gyoshi of Banyu left for the Midlands after a clash between the two armies. Were you involved in that? With this reminder, recalling what was written on the memorial, some things were coming back to Xie Lian, but only a little bit. Maybe? It was to save me, Banyu said. Everyone turned to look at her, and she mumbled. General Hua entered the fray to save me and got flattened. Xie Lian instantly remembered the agony of being trampled by thousands, and he hugged his arms in spite of himself. But when he saw the others watching him with unreadable expressions, he pulled himself back in a hurry and said, Not flat. Not too flat. Fu Yao didn't look so smug anymore and said awkwardly, "Well, aren't you a saint?" Xie Lian waved dismissively. "Nothing of the sort. I think I was just going to pick the child up and run away, but we didn't retreat fast enough and got caught between the two armies." "If that's the case," Fu Yao said, "how could you not remember something like that?" Xie Lian looked at him solemnly. "Do you not know how many hundreds of years old I am? So much can happen in a decade. There's no way to remember everything in detail. Besides, some things are best forgotten. Rather than remembering how I was butchered and trampled hundreds of years ago, I'd prefer to remember I ate a delicious meat bun yesterday, no?" "I'm sorry," said Banyu. Xie Lian sighed. "My dear Banyu, saving you was my choice. You're not at fault. If you're going to apologize, perhaps it should be to the others." Banyu was taken aback and hung her head in silence. Sounds like a bad day at a Black Friday sale. Is there such a thing as a good day at a Black Friday sale? I would argue not. "Hey, Akatsuki?" "Maybe it's because my impression of you was from 200 years ago, but I don't think you're the kind of child who sought revenge and betrayed others. Will you tell me what exactly happened? Why did you open the fortress gates?" Banyu contemplated, shook her head, and chose to remain silent. "Why did you let the snakes out to bite people?" Xie Lian asked. This time Banyu answered, "I didn't release the snakes." Xie Lian was taken back. "What?" "I didn't release the snakes," Banyu said. "They ran off on their own. I don't know why, but they don't listen to me anymore." Hearing this, Fu Yao grew impatient. Banyu pleaded, "General Hua, I'm not lying." Before Xie Lian responded, Fu Yao cut in rudely. "Anyone would say that after being captured. Even if you say it wasn't intentional, I've heard all that before. All those people crossing the pass were certainly injured by your snakes. Show me your hands. You're under arrest." Banyu shut up and extended both arms. Fu Yao immediately took out a god-binding rope and apprehended both Banyu and K-Mo, then said, "All right, we've accomplished our goal for this trip. It's over now." Just then, San Long spoke. "She had no reason to lie." Xie Lian felt there was a need for further interrogation. He turned to Banyu. "Can you not control any of your snakes?" Banyu answered, "I can control them and they'll obey me most of the time, but there are times when they won't. I don't know why." After some thought, Xie Lian said, "Why don't you call them out and show us?" "Hey, Zalia, welcome." Banyu had knelt down before him earlier. Now she finally rose to her feet and nodded. Soon, a wine-red scorpion snake slithered out from beneath a corpse, raised its head, and curled itself above the pile of dead bodies. It soundlessly flicked its tongue to the group. "Hey, Candy Dreams." Xie Lian was about to take a closer look at the snake, but saw Banyu widen her eyes, face strange. Xie Lian's heart dropped and he thought, "Oh no." As he thought, after flicking its tongue, and the snake opened its mouth and pounced towards him in attack. It was a sudden lunge, but Xie Lian was ready and about to grab the snake when boom! Something exploded. When he opened his eyes again, the snake was already a splatter of guts on the ground, having been thoroughly blown apart. It was a calculated blast, too. None of the venom spilled. Xie Lian immediately remembered another instance when a snake died like this before they entered the ruins, but there was no need to say who did it at this point. He hadn't even had the chance to look at San Long before a red sleeve flashed before him, bearing and separated him from Banyu. Ah, overprotective boy. "Hey, Cygnus, welcome." On the other side, Fu Yao said coolly, "I knew she lied. Did you think this snake could manage to bite him under these circumstances? Foolish." Banyu's face was already pale when she saw the snake, and when she heard him, her head shot up. "I didn't do it! I said there are some that don't obey, and that was one of them just now." Fu Yao didn't believe a single word. "Who knows if it was actually disobeying or obeying you?" "It wasn't even called forth by me," Banyu said. Xie Lian was about to speak when another two red wine scorpion snakes peered out from a different corpse, flicking their tongues and watching intently. Then a third, a fourth, a fifth. From the mountains of dead bodies, and all around every corner of the pit, came innumerable scorpion snakes. Everyone stared at Banyu, who was kneeling on top of a pile of corpses, and Fu Yao started spinning a ball of spiritual energy in his palms, shouting towards her. "Make them go away! They can't all disobey!" Banyu scrunched up her brows, looking as if she was trying to drive them out. Yet more and more snakes appeared, curling and crawling, slithering ever closer. Bites from 1 or 2 snakes might not kill them, but hundreds and thousands was harder to say. Even if they didn't die, it wouldn't be pretty. Xie Lian raised his wrist, about to call forth Ruoi, but saw that the snakes slithered to a certain distance. They would stop and hesitate, forming a weird circle around him and San Lang. It dawned on Xie Lian, and he glanced at the boy next to him. He was watching the snakes condescendingly with immense contempt. The scorpion snakes seemed to be able to read his eyes and didn't dare approach. They backed off a bit, lowering their savage heads as they did, pressing against the ground submissively like servants. There seemed to be another power controlling them, making them unable to abandon attacks and leave completely. Thus many of the snakes turned around and slithered towards Fu Yao. Fu Yao swung his hand and a blast of flames burst from his sleeve, killing a circle of snakes. But that wouldn't last long, and Xie Lian said, "Let's go up and get out of here!" Whoosh! Ruoi shot out from Xie Lian's arm and flew upwards, but soon another whoosh, and it was back on his arm. Xie Lian was taken aback and raised his wrist, admonishing the silk band. "What are you doing back here? The array was released! Hurry and go!" But Ruoi remained wrapped on his arm, trembling, as if it bumped into something terrifying at the top. Xie Lian was still chiding it when suddenly a long rope of something fell. Plop! It dropped on Fu Yao's shoulder. Fu Yao went to grab for it, and his face changed the moment he saw it before his eyes. It was another scorpion snake that fell from the sky. This took Fu Yao off guard, and after getting bitten, he hurled the snake towards Banyu. Even with her hands tied, she still unconsciously tried to catch it, and having caught it, the dark red snake curled itself around her arm and did not attack. Just then, another plop, and a second scorpion snake landed on the ground. Xie Lian could guess why Ruoi refused to go up now. Borrowing the faint light of the moon, Xie Lian raised his head and only just barely saw. Hundreds of little wine-red dots were rapidly descending into the Synod's pit. A snake deluge. The red dots were coming closer, and Xie Lian yelled, "Fu Yao! Fire! Shoot a stream of fire upwards and get rid of them halfway!" Fu Yao bit his palm to break skin, swung his hand, and a series of blood drops shot out, transforming into a curtain of fire jetting up the pit. Those sweeping flames rose to over tens of feet and hung midair, disintegrating all scorpion snakes that would touch it, burning them to ashes. Temporarily safe, Xie Lian let out a breath of relief. "That was good, Fu Yao. Thank goodness for you." Yet that spell consumed immense powers, and after one round, Fu Yao's face was pale. He turned around and ignited a ring of fire, dispelling the snakes from the ground, and shouted at Banyu, "You say those snakes don't obey you. If you weren't you controlling them, why wouldn't they attack you?" San Lang laughed. "Maybe it's because of your bad luck. They didn't attack us either." Fu Yao turned to look at him, his eyes sharp and narrowed. Xie Lian could sense trouble. With the ample hints he'd gotten that he hadn't had time to digest in his mind, he didn't want to see the two start fighting. He said, "Let's figure out what's going on with the snakes first." Fu Yao sneered. "What's going on? Either the Gyoshi of Banyu is lying, or the one next to you is causing trouble." Xie Lian looked at Banyu, then looked at San Lang and said, "I don't think it's either of them." His tone was gentle but firm. It was the conclusion he'd come to after much thought. However, Fu Yao must have thought he was shielding them intentionally. The face illuminated by the flames was unkind. Xie Lian couldn't tell if he was angry or laughing. "Your Royal Highness," Fu Yao said, "don't play pretend when you know the truth. Do you still know your place? I'm sure you're already very aware of what exactly that thing is next to you. I won't believe you haven't realized it." Chapter 29. Windmaster in white, bellowing sandstorms from nothing. I'm gonna have to step up my game. There heads and fields above me and animal cruelty and murder. Yeah, I've never murdered a snake before, so there's that. Xie Lian unconsciously stepped forward to stand in front of San Lang. "I know better than anyone where my place is. Xie Lian replied. Then how dare you still stand next to him? Fu Yao shouted. Because if I stand next to him, the snakes won't come, Xie Lian answered earnestly. Hearing the response, San Long piffed and laughed out loud. And the piffed is P-F-F-T'd, so like, ha! I love this scene. It's so cute and honest. Like, Xie Lian's defending San Long, but at the same time, he's being honest. He's like, hey, I'm not getting attacked if I stand next to this guy. Fu Yao became grimmer. You! Grimmer and grimmer, his face suddenly turned completely black. Not just his face, but Xie Lian's entire line of sight dimmed into darkness. The curtain of flames and the ring of fire created by Fu Yao were suddenly extinguished. Xie Lian heard San Long snicker and say, useless trash, before gripping his shoulders to pull him close. Soon after, Xie Lian heard a sudden downpour of endless battering above them, like a thunderstorm hitting an umbrella. Needless to say, now that the defensive barrier was gone, the snake deluge came pouring down crazedly. The open umbrella was blocking the downpour, and Xie Lian could smell the thick, foul odor of blood. He was about to fight, but San Long stopped him. Don't move. No lowlives will dare approach. His tone was confident, the first sentence soft and gentle, the latter with a layer of arrogance. Xie Lian wasn't worried, but hearing Fu Yao's angry roars at the other end, sounding as if he was covered in snakes, he called out, San Long! San Long instantly replied, no. Xie Lian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. How did you know what I was going to say? Don't worry so much. He can't die, San Long said. Oh, I love him so much. He's such a scoundrel. Just then, another roar came from a different part of the pit. Ban Yu! If you want me to die, then have them bite and kill me. What the hell is this? It's not me, Ban Yu cried. It seemed K-Mo had woken from being battered, discovered himself covered in countless snakes, and believed it to be Ban Yu's doing. Fu Yao, can you light another fire? Do it again, Xie Lian shouted. Fu Yao gritted his teeth. That thing next to you is restricting my powers. I can't light anything. Xie Lian felt dread, and San Long said, It's not me. I know it's not you, Xie Lian said, but that's precisely what's wrong. Both Ban Yu and K-Mo are bound by the God-binding rope. They can't use powers. My powers are depleted, and you're not restricting anyone, meaning there's a sixth person in this pit. Have you lost your mind? Fu Yao demanded. What sixth person? There wasn't anyone who came down. Who's there? Ban Yu suddenly said. Ban Yu, what's happening? Is someone over there? Xie Lian asked. Someone? Ban Yu's voice disappeared halfway. Whether her mouth was sealed shut or she'd lost consciousness was not known. Xie Lian called out again. Ban Yu! Fu Yao was still fighting snakes and throwing spiritual energy everywhere, flashing here and there in the dark. Be careful, she might be tricking you. Not necessarily, Xie Lian shouted. I'm going to save her first. What a precious boy. Xie Lian was about to run right into the snake deluge when he heard San Long's voice next to his ears. All right. Xie Lian felt the hand grasping his shoulders tighten, and in a flash they were blitzing forward. Xie Lian realized in awe the boy was advancing and attacking, but with an umbrella in one hand and him in the other. In the darkness, silver shimmers flashed about once more, clanking and clinking, when suddenly a sharp sound of two swords clashing rang in everyone's ears. Oh? San Long said. There really is a sixth person. Interesting. Xie Lian had no idea how San Long was controlling the weapon, or what kind of weapon it was, but whatever it was, it most certainly did meet head-to-head with another. The other party remained silent, and Xie Lian could only hear the sound of metal scraping metal as the fight intensified. From time to time, there would be sparks flashing in the dark, but each time it was so short-lived it was hard to see the other's face. Listening to the fight, Xie Lian could feel Ruoy grip him tighter and tighter, and had to murmur reassurance. Don't be scared. Relax. Ruoy loosened, and Xie Lian called out again. Ban Yu, are you conscious? Can you respond? No one responded. Fu Yao exclaimed, Maybe the one fighting is her. No, that's definitely not Ban Yu, Xie Lian said. When San Long fought K-Mo in the dark, he was light-footed and messing about, playing with him. This fight was also in the dark, but Xie Lian could tell San Long was taking it more seriously. The other party was extremely skilled in martial arts and weaponry. Banyu was small and weak, just looking at her limbs. It was obvious power and arms were not her forte, so it was impossible for her to be the one fighting San Lang. Who was this sixth person? When did they appear? Fu Yao griped. Someone would betray her own country is no different than Shan Ji. Why on earth would you still believe in her? Hey, Daniel, welcome. Phil! That's not fear, that's arousal. Well, you're not wrong. Fu Yao, can you not be so irritated? Xie Lian said. Wait, what did you just say? Fu Yao struck out another fist and blew away a bunch of snakes. I said, why on earth would you believe in her the same way you believe in that thing next to you? No, not that. You said Zhuan Ji. You mentioned Zhuan Ji's name, didn't you? Xie Lian said. Yeah, so what? She's completely irrelevant. Irrelevant. I almost said that wrong. Zhuan Ji, if you don't remember, was the bad guy of our first mystery, the dead bride that came back and kidnapped brides and murdered them. Xie Lian held his breath. A moment later, he called out, Stop fighting! There's no more need to hide! I know who you are! The sound of blades clashing never halted, the other party unaffected, but Xie Lian wasn't worried. Did you think I was bluffing when I said I know who you are? General Pei Jr.? Who are you talking to? Fu Yao was dumbstruck. General Pei Jr.? Don't be crazy! Who do you think he is? If he descended, everyone would know. You're very right, Xie Lian said, but what if it wasn't his true self that descended? In the darkness, the fighting weapons faltered, then continued anew. Xie Lian spoke. It took me too long to figure this out. I should have known from the beginning. I knew for close to 200 years that something was causing havoc, but none of the heavenly officials cared and no one dared to speak of it, so there must have been one or a number of officials keeping a rap on this scandal. But because I wasn't familiar with the officials, I didn't dare to boldly pin this on anyone, and tried to deduce which heavenly official it could be. It was Fu Yao's mention of Zhuan Ji that reminded him. When it came to Zhuan Ji, it wasn't hard to relate her to the two General Peis, and the north was their territory. Fu Yao once said in passing that prior to his ascension, General Pei Jr. slaughtered a city. Which city? It could be the Kingdom of Banyu. The upper court wouldn't bat an eyelash at something like this. Everyone needed to spill blood if they wanted to do great things. But slaughtering a city wasn't anything glorious after all, and if the story spread too far, it would affect the number of new believers. So of course there would be some cover-ups. Thus, even if everyone knew something happened, they probably didn't know the details or care to know. Besides, if it wasn't for deep grudges, who would have had the time or motivation to dig up the past and offend the support behind his back? Xie Lian spoke slowly. That mud face said there was someone amongst us who already visited the fortress 50 years ago. At first I thought he was lying to deceive us, but his words may have contained truth. Before, in that group of people, the one I was most suspicious of was you. The caravan followed you, and you could take them anywhere. I'd never seen a single scorpion snake in the years I lived near Banyu, and now, just from seeking a random shelter in the sandstorm, they happened to show up? I asked you to come look for Shan Yu Fern with us, but before we left, you gave directions to the ruins to the others so they could follow us. Earlier on top of the walls, I said if anything were to happen, I would go forward first. But you, who was always calm, suddenly jumped and died a meaningless death. Xie Lian continued after a pause. Your actions were strange and illogical. It took me until now to realize who you are, but it was too late. Isn't that right, General Pei Jr.? Or should I call you A Zhao? To explain, General Pei was the guy that didn't marry Zhuan Ji, the ghost in the first story, causing her to be really pissed off and mad ghost and murder people. General Pei. He's a god in the heavens. Pei Jr. is his ancestor who became a god later. And he showed up in the first story when the whole thing was covered up, finished, whatever, because he was the one who came to take Zhuan Ji to heaven. Xie Lian saying that he never went, or he sent a clone or what have you, like he did a ninjutsu, made a copy, and pretended to be this guy A Zhao so he could interfere with their case in this city so that it wouldn't be uncovered that he was the guy that murdered the city, that betrayed the city, what have you. They're going to go into more detail about it there, but that's the connection he made was, oh, of course it's General Pei because everybody says he murdered a city one time and this is a whole city that got murdered, and the reason that for 200 years people have died in this area and no heavenly official has come to fix it is because they're covering it up. They didn't want anybody to know about it. So they just kind of ignored the fact that every, decade, a dozen people die in this area. So that's what he just kind of explained. It was a moment before a cold voice came. Did you not suspect that the Mudface might have been talking about the red-clothed boy next to you? A stream of flame suddenly lit up the sinner's pit. Under the light, 2 bloody silhouettes were revealed. One was San Lang, dressed in red, proper, and standing with his weapon already tucked away. The other was a plainly clothed young man with a sword held tightly in hand, still at the ready. The plain-clothed young man was covered in blood, looking as if he was also dressed in red. His expression was cold and reserved, and he carried someone over his shoulders. It was indeed Azao. To be fair, whether it was General Pei Jr. himself or Azao, the composed, calm, and collected aura was a constant. Only Xie Lian had never followed that train of thought and hadn't connected the two until now. The one he was carrying on his shoulders was Banyu. It seemed he'd called forth the snakes in order to steal her away during the chaos. Now that his identity was revealed, he had no more need to create havoc, and the snake deluge ceased its bombardment. He sheathed his sword and gently laid Banyu down on the ground. On the side, Kamo was shocked. Who are you? Didn't you fall to your death? Azao didn't spare a look at Kamo, instead staring at San Lang intently. Kamo, you really haven't changed in these past hundreds of years, he said in the Banyu language. Perhaps the tone of this maddening calm was overly familiar. Kamo's face immediately scrunched up in rage. It's you, Pei Su! If not for the rope solidly tying him down, Kamo would have lunged at him to fight to the death. General Pei Jr., Xie Lian said, those scorpion snakes didn't just listen to one command. You controlled all the snakes, Banyu said, no longer listened to her, and went out to harm, correct? I did it. He certainly admitted it easily. Did Banyu teach you how to control the snakes? Xie Lian said. She didn't, Pei Su said. But how she does it, I very well learned for myself. General Pei Jr. is exceedingly intelligent, after all, Xie Lian commented. After a pause, he asked, when did you two meet? How did you meet? Pei Su, however, gave him a look. General Hua. Xie Lian was puzzled. Why are you calling me that title too? Pei Su asked quietly. Do you not recognize me, General Hua? Now Xie Lian did. The beginning of it was kind of blurry. Banyu was bullied and ignored by other children when she was younger, and only a young boy of Yang'an would sometimes pay attention to her. The boy was like Banyu, and didn't talk very much. Quite a number of children living on the border were from military families and enlisted in the army when they grew older. Could it be? It's you! Xie Lian was surprised. I can't believe it took me this long to realize it was you. Pei Su nodded. It's me. I've only just recognized General, too. No wonder. So it turns out Banyu and the enemy general had known each other since long ago. Alright, so connecting all this. When our hero, Xie Lian, lived in this country 200 years ago and was dragged into the war, he took care of a lot of the war orphans. One of them was a young girl who came to be known as Banyu, grew up to become the great sorceress that betrayed the kingdom and led to its downfall. The other was a young boy who, it turns out, grew up to become Pei Su, who somehow murdered this whole town, led to all the bad stuff that happened, as we're going to find out. But that's what he just realized. He knew this kid when he was growing up. Did Banyu really heed your order to open the fortress gates? Xie Lian asked. On the other side, Kamo spat and yelled, Despicable Pei Su! Untie the ropes! Let me fight him to the death! Pei Su said coolly, First of all, we already had a battle to the death 200 years ago, and you lost. Second of all, how am I despicable? Kamo shouted. If you two hadn't colluded, how would we lose? Kamo, don't deny it, Pei Su said. Even though I only had a troop of 2,000 with me at the time, breaking through the fortress gates was only a matter of time. Xie Lian couldn't help but interrupt. Wait a sec, you only had 2,000 under you and were sent to invade a country? What's going on? Isn't that no different than sending you to your death? Were you perhaps even more elbowed out in the army than I was? Pei Su stopped talking. It seemed Xie Lian had hit the mark. Xie Lian then asked, if you knew it was a sure win, why did you have Banyu open the gates? Because I needed to slaughter the fortress city, Pei Su replied. What do you mean? Xie Lian asked. Since you already were going to win, why must you slaughter the city? It was because victory was at hand that we had to wipe out the city, and it had to be as soon as possible, immediately, leaving none behind. The leaving none behind was chilling. Xie Lian pushed. And the reason? Pei Su answered. On the night before the invasion, many of the leaders of Banyu's major families gathered for a meeting and decided on a secret plot. What plot? The people of Banyu are violent in nature and hated Yong'ang to the bone, Pei Su said. Even knowing they were about to be defeated, they wouldn't submit. So the entire population of the kingdom, the old, young, women and men, banded together to assemble this thing. What thing? Xie Lian could guess but wasn't sure, and the word that came out of Pei Su's mouth confirmed his suspicions. Explosives, Pei Su slowly enunciated each word. They decided if the kingdom was to fall, the citizens would carry explosives, escape to Yong'ang, mix into crowded areas, and bomb to cause riots. Meaning, if they must die, they would drag as many Yong'ang people down with them. If the kingdom should fall, they would terrorize the country that brought their downfall. Which was why they had to be annihilated before civilians had time to flee. Xie Lian instantly turned to Keimo, roughly summarized for him in the Banyu language, and asked, Is this true? Keimo looked dauntless, without any intention to conceal the facts. It's true. San Long raised his brow and commented, How vile. Keimo replied angrily, Vile? What right do you have to call us vile? If it wasn't for your assaults, we wouldn't have been forced to make that move. You ruined us, so we sought revenge. How is that wrong? Pei Su responded, Really now? How about we lay everything out in the open? How many times have Banyu citizens started riots near the border? How many caravans and travelers going to the West Plains from Yong'ang were ambushed by Banyu? You intentionally sheltered bandits that terrorized Yong'ang, killed our soldiers who were sent to wipe them out under the pretense of illegal border crossings. How is that not vile? Pei Su spoke unhurriedly, and his tone was calm, but each word was sharp as knives. Keimo argued, What about you? Why not say you forcibly occupied our land first? The border had always been ambiguous. How can you say we forcibly occupied your land? Pei Su countered. The lines were clearly drawn. It was you who didn't keep to yourselves. The lines were drawn by Banyu. Yong'ang never agreed. And your border had the oasis all to yourselves, leaving only desert land to us. Keimo was red in the face. The oasis is ours. It has always been ours. Both sides had their stories. Listening to them argue made Xie Lian befuddled. The hostility was making him remember how badly he'd been beaten up in the middle of them. He could feel the pain on his face resurface. Pei Su seemed to have had enough of quarreling with Keimo, and he turned to Xie Lian. So you see, there are many things in the world that simply can't be clearly defined or resolved. You can only fight. Xie Lian sighed. I'll agree to the first part. San Long, on the other side, said, I'll agree to the last. Keimo's anger was somewhat curbed, and he suddenly said, The majority of Yong'ang people were shameless, but you were the most shameless I've ever met. Pei Su, you're a cold-hearted man. You didn't kill us for your country, and it wasn't for saving your people. Hearing this, Pei Su fell silent. Keimo continued, You exiled son of man, look down on my all. You only wanted to secure your footing in the Yong'ang army to keep climbing up, so you had to win. So sad that Banyu still thought you good and was used by you, betrayed us for the likes of you. But isn't General Pei Jr. General Pei's descendant? Xie Lian wondered. To have such a renowned ancestor watching over him, how could he have fallen so astray? He's not the direct descendant of General Pei, San Long spoke up. He's from however many branches out. Pei Su said quietly, Banyu had always been my subordinate and only obeyed my command to infiltrate the kingdom of Banyu. She is from both Banyu and Yong'an. Once she chose her side, she had to be loyal, so there was no such thing as betrayal. The Banyu people are evil. I have no regrets in killing them. Suddenly, a voice came from above. Having no regrets in killing! Well said! Will you say the same in regards to all the travelers who were misled by you to this pass and lost their lives in the pit? The voice that came from above. The voice came from above everyone's heads, and Xie Lian instantly looked up. Which great lord is amongst us? There wasn't a response, but suddenly a strange noise. Whoosh! Like the bellowing of wild winds. When the sound finally came near, Xie Lian could finally say with certainty it was the bellowing of wild winds, and one of the best characters in this entire novel. The abrupt gale entered the sinner's pit from above, swept all the way to the bottom, and rolled everyone into the air. Xie Lian immediately grabbed for San Long, who was closest to him, and cried, "Watch out!" San Long caught him too, face unchanging. Xie Lian only felt a whirl of spinning, their bodies swiftly rising, and after a pause, they started plunging down. Xie Lian threw out Ruoy and coaxed in the midst of this chaos. All right, everything's over. Hurry, my good Ruoy, come out and give us a hand." After a couple of pets, Ruoy finally reacted. However, with nothing in the air to grab onto other than a giant sinner's pit below, Ruoy flew about once and shrunk back. Feeling helpless, Xie Lian could only adjust his form for landing in the air. If it was like previous times, he would have cratered headfirst 3 feet into the ground. But this time, just before they hit the ground, San Long reached out and gave him a pull, and he landed with his feet flat on the ground. With his boots firmly touching down, he was even a little incredulous, but that feeling went away very quickly when a black-clad silhouette came stumbling before him. Xie Lian saw who it was and called, "Nanfang!" It was Nanfang indeed, but a disheveled Nanfang. It looked as if he'd been rolled in grime 10 times before getting thrown into a rambunctious den of beasts to spend the night. His clothes were tattered and beraggled to the max. Hearing Xie Lian's call, he only waved his hand and quietly wiped at his face, unable to speak. Xie Lian lifted him to his feet. "What happened? Did those 2 ladies beat you up?" Before his words fully left his lips, the 2 figures appeared behind Nanfang and strolled over. One of them was the woman cultivator in white, with a whisk in her arms, and she greeted Xie Lian cheerfully. I believe what it is like a stick with a horsewhip on the end. I don't think it's actually like a cooking whisk. "How do you do, your royal highness?" Although Xie Lian didn't know who this was, proper etiquette must still be kept. However, he didn't know how to address her, so he could only smile back and wave. Greetings, fellow cultivator." The lady in black on the side glanced at Xie Lian coldly, but didn't seem to care for him. When her eyes moved to San Long, however, she paused, seeming to think he was a dubious figure, and stopped for a moment. The gusts earlier had blown everyone out of the pit, and the 2 ladies walked past Xie Lian, heading straight for Pei Su. He saw them approach and didn't appear surprised. After all, he'd already seen them in town when he was still playing the part of Azao. He knelt down where he was, bowed his head to the lady cultivator in white, and greeted quietly, "Lord Windmaster." Xie Lian was stunned hearing these words, and here he thought she was some menacing ghost or monster. Who knew it was actually a heavenly official? And it was the Windmaster, the one who'd been throwing out merits in the communication array. This was a while back. They were, before he left for this mission, the Windmaster was basically throwing money in the air and saying, "Catch, guys! Whee!" But now he was thinking about it, there wasn't anything out of place. At the time, she was saying something along the lines of, "Where did they go? Do I have to dig them out and kill them one by one?" And that made him think she was after them. In reality, this "they" might not have meant them, it meant the Banyu soldiers. Only Xie Lian thought he was alone in his investigation, and naturally thought the cultivators were strange and wicked. To a heavenly official that could easily hand out 10,000 merits, Xie Lian couldn't help but feel a nameless reverence. He elbowed Nanfang. "Why didn't you tell me this was the Windmaster sooner? And here I thought she might be some sort of snake spirit. What a disgrace!" Nanfang's expression darkened. "I didn't know it was the Windmaster. I've never seen the Windmaster like this before. The Windmaster's always been... Never mind." Xie Lian understood. This was probably a fake appearance the Lord Windmaster was donning, so he didn't dig into it. He asked, "How did the Windmaster come to Banyu Pass?" "To help out," Nanfang said. "When we saw them strolling in the streets earlier, they were actually looking for Banyu soldiers." Xie Lian recalled how the first time he asked about the Banyu Pass in the communication array, in the midst of silent awkwardness, it was the Windmaster's sudden release of 10,000 merits that distracted everyone. The Windmaster probably took notice of his query then. As Xie Lian mused, the Windmaster bent down in front of Pei Su. "Little Pei, I've heard everything you know." Pei hung his head. The Windmaster demanded, "Do you admit that in these past 200 years, you were the one who lured all these travelers into the ancient kingdom of Banyu?" Since he was already caught, Pei Su didn't argue and only replied solemnly, "It was me." "Why?" the Windmaster demanded. After a pause, Pei Su asked, "Lord Windmaster has long been suspicious. Can you not guess why? Is it because these souls of the dead are the iron proof of the blood on your hands whilst you were human, and would become obstacles for your climbing higher in the future?" Pei Su neither agreed nor disagreed. Xie Lian, who was listening quietly on the side, couldn't help but ask, "If anything, why didn't you just kill them directly? Why must you use such a method as feeding them the living in order to appease their resentment? How is that different than using another's flesh and blood to quench the thirst of one?" San Long spoke up. He couldn't. That was true too. In the upper court, every move by a heavenly official like Pei Su was watched intently by countless eyes. There were many things he couldn't do directly. He couldn't use his true form to come down and kill all these resentful spirits of these soldiers straightforwardly, and he couldn't send troops to annihilate them either. This was already a concealed affair. If there was too much of a stir, it would attract everyone's gaze. At most, he could send a clone like Azao down quietly. Using the scorpion snakes, Banyu was known to be an expert in manipulating to go out and harm, attracting passerbys in order to feed the resentful spirits and disperse them. No doubt it was a perfect scheme. "Your General Pei wouldn't have done something like this at all," the Windmaster said. "This time, I'm afraid you've crossed the line." As a heavenly official, that he would release a clone to cause havoc for almost 200 years, lure numerous passerbys down the wrong path and into the ruins to die in the mouths of Banyu soldiers. No matter how you spun it, it wasn't a small deal. "Aw, thank you, Daniel." Pei Su lowered his head and said, "This young one knows." The Windmaster swept the whisk. "As long as you understand. Reflect on yourself and think on it. We'll talk in the heavens." "I understand," Pei Su said quietly. Having finished talking with Pei Su, the Windmaster stuffed the whisk into the back collar of her robe, stood up, and smiled at Xie Lian. "Your Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, I've heard much about you." To Xie Lian, heard much about you really was not a compliment, but nevertheless it was meaningless pleasantry, so he smiled back. I'm sure it's nothing. I've heard much about you as well, Lord Windmaster." "Sorry about before, by the way," the Windmaster said. Xie Lian paused. "Before? What happened before? Didn't you all run into a windstorm in the desert?" Xie Lian could remember the mouthfuls of sand and replied, "Yes." "I started that," the Windmaster said. The Windmaster continued casually. "The windstorm was meant to stop you all from getting near the kingdom of Banyu, but you didn't get blown away and ended up in Banyu anyway." The more Xie Lian listened, the more he felt something wasn't right. Starting a windstorm to stop them from going to the Banyu Pass, and now this whole thing suddenly was in the open? What did it mean? Xie Lian didn't respond, biting to see what the other would say. The Windmaster then continued. "In regards to this whole ordeal, I would suggest your Highness mind your own business and stop putting your hands where they don't belong." Xie Lian stole a look at Banyu curled up on the ground and dreaded. He was already worried if this scandal was to reach the upper court, the officials could easily muck up the truth, add strokes where there wasn't, and have Banyu take all the blame, while little Pei ran off scot-free, with Windmaster's sudden appearance telling him to mind his business. Didn't this cement the fact that they were protecting little Pei? Without changing his expression, Xie Lian stepped forward to stand in front of Banyu, hiding her behind him, and said warmly, "I've already put my hands into this business. I can't possibly leave now." What a good boy. The Windmaster noticed his gesture and smiled. "Don't be concerned. You can take the Gyoshi of Banyu with you." That was unexpected. Xie Lian was slightly taken aback, and the Windmaster continued. While you were in the pit, we heard everything from up here. Although the Yoshi has turned into a savage ghost, when I roamed the city, I saw she had drawn the array to trap the Banyu soldiers and released captured mortals. She didn't hurt anyone and was even saving people. The only ones I'm taking are General Pei Jr. and K-Mo. You don't have to worry about me placing blame on anyone. Xie Lian relaxed. I'm much ashamed. I've been suspicious. It's normal to worry, the Windmaster said. There's an unpleasant culture in the heavens, after all. The lady in black looked as if she couldn't stay for another moment and spoke up. Are you done? If you're done, then let's go. The Windmaster rebutted. What's the rush? The more you rush, the more I want to talk. Still, she turned her head and smiled, taking out a folding fan from her waist and said, Your Royal Highness, if there's nothing else, we'll see you in the upper court. Xie Lian nodded, and the Windmaster opened her fan. On the fan was the word for wind, feng, in a slant, and 3 inclining lines like the wind on the back. This was the Windmaster's spiritual device. She fanned forward 3 times and backwards 3 times, and suddenly a gust of wind blew from the flat ground. The wind drew dust and sand, and Xie Lian raised his sleeve to block off the debris. When the wind died down, the 2 ladies, Pei Su and K-Mo, had all disappeared, leaving only Xie Lian, San Lang, Nan Feng, and the deeply asleep Banyu behind. Xie Lian dropped his sleeve, still a little dazed. What just happened? San Lang casually strolled over. A pretty good thing. Xie Lian watched him. Is it? Yeah? The Windmaster was trying to help you by telling you not to get involved. Nan Feng walked over too. That's right. You've dug deep into this business already. The only thing left to do is file a complaint to the Heavenly Martial Emperor. Don't get involved anymore. Xie Lian got it. Is it because of General Pei? Correct, Nan Feng said. This time you've thoroughly offended him. So in other words, Pei Jr. is the descendant of the more powerful General Pei, and by figuring out that his, basically grandson committed this crime, he's not going to be happy about it, and they're saying, hey, Xie Lian, don't get too involved, he might take it out on you. I knew I was going to offend someone one of these days. I guess it doesn't matter who. Nan Feng furrowed his brow. Don't think I'm joking. After the Great Martial Hall, the next most powerful palace is Mingguang. General Pei thinks very highly of Little Pei and has always tried to boot Quan Yizhen. He's going to come knocking looking for trouble. Quan Yizhen is the martial god that rules the West, right? Xie Lian asked. That's the one, Nan Feng replied. Quan Yizhen is also a new official. He ascended around the same time as Pei Su. He's young and a little, very powerful. General Pei wanted Pei Su to take all the devotees of the West, and he's done well for himself, especially these past few years. Now, with you dragging this scandal out into the open, it's not looking good for Pei Su. He might even be banished. If he gets banished, your luck is going to turn for the worse. Xie Lian rubbed his forehead, mentally taking note that from now on, he'd have to be more mindful when eating, drinking, walking. San Lang, however, didn't think it was a big deal. Don't worry. Peng Ming is too proud. He won't do anything underhanded. Nan Feng gave him a look. What about the Windmaster? Xie Lian asked. She told me not to get involved, so isn't she the one who'll file the complaint? Doesn't that mean she'll be the one offending General Pei? I can't have that. Let's call her back. Nan Feng, do you know the password to her array? You needn't worry about the Windmaster, Nan Feng said. General Pei can hurt you, but he won't touch her. She may be younger than you, but she's much more successful in the heavens. Xie Lian was shocked into silence, but was instead thinking, who in the heavens is a more of a failure than me? I don't think there's anyone. San Lang laughed. With that backing, of course she's successful. Are you talking about the lady in black? She looks strong too, Xie Lian remarked. No, San Lang replied, but she should be one of the other 5 elemental masters that make up wind, water, rain, earth, thunder. Probably shouldn't offend her either. The Windmaster could start a twister from nothing, obviously powerful. But the lady in black was stronger. Xie Lian recalled the way she watched San Lang as if she'd found out something and felt concerned. I agree, but still, there were words Xie Lian thought didn't need to be said, and he swallowed them. He thought, even with a strong backing, you may not be successful. Back in the day, the Crown Prince of Zhanli had the support of the Heavenly Martial Emperor, who'd ruled all 3 realms for 1,000 years. He was still a failure. My poor boy. Xie Lian picked up his fallen bamboo hat, dusted it, seeing it wasn't flattened, and sighed in relief. He tied it around his neck and looked at Nan Feng. Were you fighting those 2 ladies all this way? Yes, we fought the entire way, Nanfang replied, face dark. Xie Lian patted his shoulder. Oh. Apparently I have so many fans on in my room I knocked over one of my cardboard video game boxes. Oh well. Thanks for your hard work. Suddenly he remembered there was another who worked hard and turned around. Where's Fu Yao? Wasn't he watching the wounded? Nanfang responded. Xie Lian didn't recall seeing Fu Yao after getting blown out of the sinner's pit. Actually, ever since Azao revealed himself, there had been no more sounds from him. If he didn't leave back then, he must have left when the wind blew. Xie Lian wasn't actually that worried. He figured Fu Yao didn't want to get mixed up in the mess, so he ran off. But having heard Nanfang say wounded, he came into shock and cried out at the same time, "The fern!" The sky only just lightened. No rush, San Long said. There was no such thing as no rush when it came to saving lives. Even if it was far from the 24-hour period, who knew if anything had happened in all that time? Xie Lian had no time to think about Fu Yao. He hurriedly lifted Banyu onto his back and ran toward the palace grounds. Once at the palace, Xie Lian set Banyu down and immediately picked a few large bushels of the Shan Yu fern. The mud face was still on the ground, its bloody mess amongst the white bones. In the past, Xie Lian would have buried it. But first of all, he was in a hurry to save people. And secondly, that man had been buried in the ground for 50 years. He might not want to go back. But the corpse of the dead merchant was missing, and Xie Lian stopped, puzzled. Just then, San Long emerged from the palace with a small clay pot. When Xie Lian saw, he immediately called out, "Ah, bless you, San Long." Banyu was weak and wouldn't wake up, so Xie Lian shrank her and tucked her into the pot. A group of them continued collecting ferns and rushed back. It had been about 8 hours since they left. Returning to where Fu Yao had drawn the circle, Xie Lian saw many were still within it, scared to venture out. The old man who'd taken Nanfang's pill was doing all right, and after applying herbs to his wound, he was able to stand and walk after resting for a while. Only Xie Lian didn't think there was any need to tell them what the herb used to grow on. After some time, the merchants were calm and began to worry. But where's Tiansheng? How come they haven't returned yet? Xie Lian was too busy picking herbs earlier and didn't bother with Tiansheng and the others. He was just thinking about going back to the ruins to search for them when he heard the voice of a boy yelling, "Gege!" and uncles coming closer. Xie Lian turned his head, and sure enough, it was Tiansheng. The boy had a large bushel of the Shan Yu fern in his arms, and behind him were 2 other merchants, all huffing and puffing. Hey, Clem, welcome. And hey, Jeff. Turns out, while on the top of the sinner's pit, Banyu swept the soldiers down and captured Tiansheng and the merchants. They were terrified, but Banyu just led them down from the pit, directed them where to go before sending them on their way. They escaped, picked the herbs, buried the merchant's body, and ran back. Yet still somehow were slower than Xie Lian. In any case, Xie Lian escorted the caravan out of the desert and ended his journey. Before they bid farewell, Tiansheng snuck out to him and whispered mysteriously, "Guga, I have a question for you." "Ask away," Xie Lian said. "You're actually a god, aren't you?" Xie Lian was astonished, but also a little touched. In the past, there was a time he'd holler and announce to the world, "I'm a god! I am the crown prince, his royal highness." But no one would believe him. This time, he hadn't even said anything, and the other party asked if he was a god, deeply surprising him, but also moving him. Tiansheng added immediately, "I saw you use spells. Don't worry, I won't tell." How could you even tell? No one would believe you, Xie Lian thought. Tiansheng continued, "If not for you, I would have gotten thrown into that pit by those ugly ghost soldiers. When I get home, I'll build a temple and worship you." Xie Lian patted his chest and watched him pat his chest and make very big hand gestures. I guess meaning big, big temple. Aww. And he couldn't help but laugh. He smiled. "Thank you." San Lang was standing to the side, and he chuckled lightly for some unknown reason. Xie Lian didn't think it was because he thought a child's naive words were ridiculous. Although children had no idea how much work went into constructing a temple, receiving such a promise, fulfilled or not, was nevertheless a happy occasion. After much hassling, he had to leave behind a random title, the Scrap Immortal. Then he waved and walked off in the opposite direction. Nanfang drew another distance-shortening array and sent them all back to Pu Kui Shrine. Opening the door, Xie Lian took the straw mat out, laid it open on the ground, and collapsed onto it like a dead body. This was all done in one breath. San Lang sat down next to him, propping his hand on his chin, and watched him. Xie Lian sighed. "How long were we gone?" Around 3-4 days, San Long replied. Xie Lian sighed again. Only 3-4 days? How am I so tired? Ever since he descended, he was always worked to the bone like a dog. After he was done sighing, Xie Lian looked up. Huh? Nanfang, why haven't you reported back? Report back where? Nanfang asked. Aren't you a junior official of Nanyang Palace? Won't your general miss you after these days? My general isn't in the palace right now. He won't miss me, Nanfang replied. Xie Lian rolled over and got up. All right, it'll be good if you stay. What are you doing? Nanfang asked. Xie Lian looked at him cheerfully. I'm going to cook you a meal as a reward for your hard work. Nanfang's face dropped drastically. He raised his hand, pressed 2 fingers together and touched his temple, as if receiving someone's private communication. He got up and turned. There's an emergency at the palace. I'll see you later. Xie Lian waved his hand. What? Nanfang, don't go. How can there suddenly be an emergency? I really want to thank you for everything. There's an emergency! Nanfang roared and ran out the door. Xie Lian sat back down on the mat and looked at San Long. I guess he's not hungry. There was a loud bang before San Long could reply, and it was Nanfang who came back, having slammed open the door in a rush. You two! Xie Lian and San Long were sitting together on the mat, and both raised their heads to look at him. What about us? Nanfang pointed his finger at San Long, and then at Xie Lian. His words stuck in his throat, unable to speak. Then finally, I'll be back! You're very welcome to, Xie Lian said. Nanfang gave San Long one last stink eye before closing the door and leaving. Xie Lian crossed his arms and tilted his head like San Long often did, and said, Looks like there really is an emergency. He turned to look at the boy next to him and smiled cheerfully. He's not hungry, but how about you? San Long smiled cheerfully. I'm starving. Xie Lian grinned and stood up again, turned around and casually cleaned the altar table. All right then, what do you want to eat? Hua Cheng. Behind him, there was silence, and then chuckling. I still prefer the name San Long. So he finally confirmed he is Hua Cheng, the Ghost King. Xie Lian kind of knew it all along, but wasn't calling him out on it, because, you know, he kind of realized that even though he's a Ghost King, he's not actually a bad guy, and he's been helping him out. He doesn't quite understand yet why San Long's hanging around and helping him out, but he'll catch on eventually why. Ugh, what a sweet moment, what a sweet story. I really do enjoy this. It's very, like I said early on, it's very episodic, like there's arcs. We've just finished the desert arc. From now on, it's gonna get a little more intense to kind of cover more of like the big plot line. Like it's gonna get a lot more going on. It's gonna dig more into the universe. The first 2 I think are a little shorter. I don't remember which one happened. Oh, I do remember. This is the beginning of a kind of a big arc that's gonna be fun. I really love this story. It's so sweet. We've unfortunately caught up with the manhwa, which means it's gonna be hard for me to actually, like, I've just had random images the last couple times because the manhwa, I think, is stuck at the very beginning of the Banyu arc. So unless I was gonna, you know, step and pause this story for a couple weeks, there's no point. We're gonna outstrip the manhwa pretty fast anyway, because they go on breaks and stuff. You should read the manhwa. The art's gorgeous. But thank you all for joining me. If you like what I do and you want to support it, you can always become a member through Patreon or YouTube. Links are in the description that show all the bonus content that you get and how to become a member. Follow me on social media to be kept up to date on projects and events and things like that. Join the Discord if you want to hang out and play games and watch TV. We're watching The Untamed right now, which is a different work by this author, an adaptation, a TV show of her work. Tomorrow we'll be continuing that. And, yeah, we're gonna keep reading, I think, Silmarillion on Wednesday. It's close, we're, like, almost to the end. There's, like, 2 stories left. And then we're gonna have to figure out what we're gonna read next. I mean, eventually I want to read all the Tolkien things, but I don't know if we'll jump right into another Tolkien thing. We'll see. I might let, members have some input on what we read next. Because now there's so many novels I want to read. Not just, like, Tolkien, one thing. Also, I really have more of these web novels that I've been discovering and reading lately that I would love to share, because I feel like that's something that, like, you can't get an audiobook of this, you know? You could go get an audiobook of Tolkien, I guess, but I like to be able to, like, explore the lore and stuff with Tolkien, but, like, I'm not going to read a Percy Jackson book to y'all, because that probably has an audiobook. Anyway, I'll post what things I'm thinking of reading later in the Discord. But I'll be back in a little bit with a video game. Don't know what yet, but something. So I will see you guys then. Bye!